Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. She said if I wanted to save my sister, I had to live as a girl until the moon changed color. I never believed in things like witches or curses. I was a man of science, a second-year medical student. My world was one of biology, chemistry, and cold, hard facts, a world where death was a final, irreversible cessation of biological functions. But that world had crumbled 3 weeks ago, the day I lost my sister, Clara. The rain was relentless that night, a cold, miserable downpour that soaked through my jacket and plastered my hair to my forehead. It was the kind of rain that felt like weeping, mirroring the hollow ache in my chest. I was kneeling at her grave, the fresh-turned earth already a muddy soup, the polished granite of her headstone read, Clara Mayhew, beloved sister and daughter, gone too soon, 18 years old, a car accident, a drunk driver who walked away with a few scratches. Facts, cold, hard, and utterly useless. They couldn't bring her back. It's not fair. Clara, I whispered, my voice cracking. The words were swallowed by the wind. You had so much left to do. Art school. You were going to be brilliant. My desperate prayers had gone unanswered. My grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. It was in that moment of absolute despair, when the world had shrunk to nothing but mud and rain and loss, that I heard a voice. Grief is a powerful offering, but it is a selfish one. It nourishes only the dead, not the living. I jerked my head up, startled. A woman stood under the ancient oak tree at the edge of the cemetery, a silhouette against the distant, hazy glow of the city. She held a black umbrella, but the rain seemed to avoid her, sliding away as if repelled by an unseen force. She was tall and ageless, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold the darkness of the night sky within them. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Some call me the Witch of Virelane," she said, her voice smooth and low, like velvet over steel. She took a step closer, her heels making no sound on the sodden grass. "But what I am is less important than what I can offer." I should have run. I should have dismissed her as some lunatic preying on the grieving. But my scientific mind was drowned out by the primal scream of a brother who had failed to protect his sister. What could you possibly offer? "A second chance," she said simply. Her eyes flickered to the headstone. "I can bring her back. Her soul is still tethered, lingering. It has not yet crossed over." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was insane, impossible, and yet, what's the catch? There's always a catch. "Clever boy," she purred, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The universe demands balance. A life cannot be returned without a price. A soul cannot be restored without another to take its place in the cosmic debt. Someone must bear her fate. A soul for a soul, a form for a form." I stared at her, my mind racing. I thought she meant a symbolic ritual, some kind of spiritual transference of grief or burden. I was so broken, so willing to believe in anything, that I didn't question the ambiguity of her words. "What do you need me to do?" She produced a piece of parchment that looked ancient and brittle, yet it was perfectly dry despite the downpour. From the folds of her dark coat, she took a long, sharp thorn, a promise bound in blood, a contract that states you will assume her debt until it is paid. "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. "Anything." She held the thorn out to me. I took it and pricked my thumb, watching as a single, perfect bead of crimson welled up. I pressed my thumb to the parchment, smearing my blood across a line of script I couldn't read. The moment my blood touched it, the parchment flared with a soft, ethereal light before turning to ash in the wind. The witch smiled. "The bargain is struck. Go home, Evan, when you wake, the debt will begin." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as if she were made of them. I was left alone in the rain, my mind a whirlwind of hope and lunacy. I stumbled back to my car, my clothes soaked and my body shivering, but a tiny, dangerous flame had been lit in the frozen cavern of my heart. I drove home in a daze, stripped off my wet clothes, and fell into bed, too exhausted to even think. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the first I'd had in weeks. When I awoke, It was not to the familiar gray light of my own bedroom. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were a soft lilac, covered in framed sketches of flowers and faces. A white vanity table sat in the corner, cluttered with brushes, makeup palettes, and bottles of perfume. This was Clara's room. Confusion warred with a creeping dread. Had I sleepwalked, I sat up, and that's when the world tilted on its axis. A cascade of long chestnut hair fell over my shoulders and onto my chest. It wasn't a wig. I could feel the roots, the weight of it against my scalp. My hands flew up to touch it, and my breath hitched. The hands were not my own. They were smaller, slender, with neatly trimmed nails painted a pale pink. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. I threw back the covers, a light, floral-scented duvet, and looked down. I was wearing a delicate white lace nightgown. The thin fabric did nothing to hide the body beneath it. My broad, muscular chest was gone. In its place were two soft, small breasts that rose and fell with my panicked breathing. My stomach was flat and smooth, my hips gently curved, my legs long and hairless. This was not my body. With a strangled cry, I scrambled out of bed. My legs felt unsteady, my center of gravity completely wrong. I stumbled toward the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door. The face that stared back was familiar and yet horrifyingly alien. It was Clara's face, her wide, hazel eyes, her button nose, the faint smattering of freckles across her cheeks. My face, her face. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound that came out was not my own deep voice. It was a high, soft soprano, a gasp of terror that was unmistakably, chillingly, Clara's. "No, no, this can't be happening," I whispered. Her voice, my thoughts. The dissonance was so profound it made me dizzy. I felt the softness of the hair tickling my cheek, smelled the scent of her strawberry shampoo, felt the delicate fabric of the nightgown against skin that was impossibly smooth and sensitive. Every sensation was a fresh wave of horror. This wasn't a dream. This was real. A form for a form. The witch's words echoed in my mind, no longer ambiguous but hideously clear. I had agreed to take Clara's place, to bear her fate. I just never imagined she meant it so literally. I had become her. Then, as if whispered on the sunbeam cutting through the room, I heard her voice again, cold and final, a message delivered from some impossible place. "You have 7 days to live as she did, to walk in her shoes, to wear her face, to answer to her name. If anyone discovers you are not her, if the illusion breaks, the contract will be void. Her soul and yours will be forfeit, gone forever." I sank to my knees on the plush rug, my reflection, her reflection crumpling with me. I was trapped. I was a prisoner in my own sister's body. The bargain had been struck, and the debt was just beginning. The first day was a lesson in abject humiliation and terror. Every simple act became a monumental challenge. The first hurdle was the bathroom. My mind reeled at the biological reality of this new form, a place of profound and intimate difference that my medical textbooks had never prepared me for. I felt like a trespasser in my own skin, a ghost piloting a foreign vessel. After a shower that was a study in panicked avoidance, I faced the next impossible task, getting dressed. I stood wrapped in a fluffy pink towel, staring into Clara's closet. It was a sea of colors, textures, and shapes I didn't understand. Dresses, skirts, blouses, things with lace, things that glittered. It was the wardrobe of a vibrant, outgoing 18-year-old girl. It was my personal hell. My mission was simple: survive a day at her high school. I had to find her uniform. After a frantic search, I found it hanging neatly: a plaid skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a navy blue blazer. Putting it on was an ordeal. The blouse was simple enough, but the delicate buttons felt alien under my clumsy fingers. Then came the bra. I fumbled with the strange contraption of straps and hooks, my face burning with shame. It felt restrictive, the underwire digging into my ribs. How could anyone wear this all day? Next were the tights. They were a sheer, delicate fabric that I was terrified of tearing. Pulling them up my long, smooth legs was a bizarre sensation, the nylon clinging to my skin. Finally, the skirt. It was shorter than I expected, ending mid-thigh. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The cool morning air on my bare legs was a constant, unnerving reminder of my new reality. The final challenge was the shoes, a pair of low-heeled black loafers. They looked innocent enough, but the slight elevation threw off my balance completely. I teetered around her room, clinging to furniture like a toddler learning to walk. Every step was a negotiation between my brain's memory of movement and this body's different mechanics. I caught my reflection in the mirror again before leaving. A stranger stared back, a schoolgirl, with my long hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. I looked convincing. I looked like Clara. The thought sent another jolt of panic through me. I grabbed her backpack, took a deep breath, and walked out of the room, my new hips swaying with an awkward, unfamiliar rhythm. Her best friend, Mia, was waiting by the curb in her beat-up blue convertible. She was bright and bubbly, her energy a stark contrast to my own coiled anxiety. "Clara, you're going to be late," she called, honking the horn. "You look a little pale. Everything okay?" I forced a smile, pitching my voice to match the soft tones I'd heard in the mirror. "Yeah, just a rough night. Didn't sleep well." Mia's expression softened with concern. "You've been through so much. We're all here for you, you know." I nodded, my throat tight. She was talking about my own death. The irony was a bitter pill. I slid into the passenger seat, the short skirt riding up my thighs. I instinctively tried to pull it down, a gesture that felt strangely natural. School was a nightmare landscape of smiling faces and friendly greetings, each one a potential landmine. Every hey, Clara made me jump. I navigated the crowded hallways by following Mia, my head down, trying to be invisible. But Clara hadn't been invisible. She was popular, loved. People were drawn to her, and now to me. In art class, I sat before a blank canvas, completely lost. I couldn't draw a straight line, let alone the still life of fruit the teacher had set up. Clara was the artist. I was the scientist. I spent the hour smudging charcoal, trying to look busy, praying no one would ask to see my work. Lunch was the true trial by fire. Mia led me to the usual table, where a group of her friends were already seated, and among them was Ryan. Ryan, Clara's boyfriend, he had a kind face, an easy smile, and sandy blonde hair that fell into his eyes. He'd been at the funeral, his face a mask of grief. Seeing him now, my stomach twisted into a knot. He looked up as we approached, and his face lit up. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice warm. Before I could react, he stood up and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. The feeling of a man's arms around me, the warmth of his chest against my back, the scent of his cologne, it sent my brain into overdrive. My first instinct was to shove him away, to shout, "Get off me!" But I couldn't. I was Clara, and Clara would love this. I forced my rigid body to relax, even managing a weak smile. "Hey, Ryan." He squeezed me gently. "I missed you this morning." "Sorry," I stammered. "I was running late." The physical contact was disorienting. It wasn't just the shock of a man holding me. It was the body's reaction. A strange, fluttering warmth spread through my chest. My skin tingled where he touched me. It was a physiological response I couldn't control, and it terrified me. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert, deflecting questions and mimicking the social cues I saw around me. I felt like a spy in enemy territory, and the mission was my very existence. That night, back in the sanctuary of Clara's room, I collapsed onto her bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. My feet ached from the heels, and my mind was numb from the constant performance. This was impossible. How could I keep this up for 6 more days? Driven by a desperate need to understand the person I was supposed to be, I started searching her room. I needed more than just a uniform and a name. I needed a script. Under her bed, in a shoebox filled with old concert tickets and photos, I found her journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. It felt like a profound violation of her privacy, but I had no choice. I had to know her. I started reading, and my world tilted once more. The early entries were filled with the light and life I expected: excitement about art school, funny anecdotes about Mia, gushing entries about Ryan. But as I read closer to the present, The tone began to change. The cheerful script became tighter, darker. October 12th. Ryan said he loved me today. I should be happy. Why do I feel so empty inside? It's like I'm watching my life from behind a glass wall. November 3rd, Mia thinks I'm just stressed about applications. She doesn't see it. No one does. It's easier to just smile. The smile is like armor. November 21st, tried to talk to Evan today. He was studying for a big exam. He seemed so busy, so focused. He told me we'd talk later, but later never came. I just wanted to tell him I wasn't okay. I just wanted my big brother. The last entry was dated 2 days before the accident. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the book. I had brushed her off. I remembered that phone call. I'd been cramming for my anatomy final. Stressed and irritable. I'd promised I would call her back. I never did. She had been drowning, and I hadn't even noticed. I was so wrapped up in my own ambitions, my own future, that I had completely missed her pain. Tears streamed down my face, her face, and fell onto the pages. This wasn't just a magical curse. It wasn't a random twist of fate. I understood now. The witch hadn't lied. I was here to assume her debt, to carry her fate. But it was more than that. This was my penance. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, at the tear-streaked face of the sister I had failed. "If I have to live your life, Clara," I whispered, my voice thick with a grief that was now mingled with a profound, soul-crushing guilt, "maybe this is my punishment." The guilt became my new compass. My performance was no longer just about survival. It was about honoring her, about trying to understand the life I had so carelessly overlooked. The next few days passed in a blur of forced smiles and carefully chosen words. I studied her journal every night, learning her favorite songs, her private jokes with Mia, her fears and her dreams. I was becoming a better Clara than I had ever been in Evan. Something strange was happening to me, something that went beyond the physical. The initial horror and revulsion were slowly being replaced by a bewildering sense of assimilation. The boundary between Evan the actor and Clara the character was beginning to blur. It started with small things. I stopped tripping in her shoes. My movements became more fluid, more graceful. I found myself unconsciously tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. A gesture I'd seen Clara make 1,000 times. When I laughed at one of Mia's jokes, the sound was still hers, but it felt less like a performance and more like a genuine reaction. My body was teaching my mind how to be her. The most profound changes happened in front of the mirror. At first, I had avoided my reflection, unable to stand the sight of the stranger wearing my consciousness. But now I was drawn to it. I would stand in front of her vanity, studying the face that was mine for now. I traced the curve of her jaw, the shape of her lips. I saw the exhaustion in my eyes. One evening, after removing the light makeup I was learning to apply, I just stared. I wasn't looking at a girl's face anymore. I was looking at my face. The disconnect, the feeling of being a pilot in a machine, was fading. The face in the mirror was no longer just a mask. It was becoming me, and I, in turn, was becoming it. I ran a hand through the long, soft hair. The scent of her shampoo was no longer just her scent. It was my scent. I touched my cheek, the skin soft and smooth beneath my fingertips. My fingertips. It was a subtle shift in perception, but it was seismic. That night, I heard her voice in my head. It wasn't an external whisper like the witches. It was an internal thought, yet it wasn't my own. It was a gentle, sad echo. "It's hard, isn't it, to make everyone think you're okay when you're falling apart inside?" I gasped, looking around the empty room. There was no one there. The voice was a memory, a feeling, a part of her that was now fused with my own consciousness. "I don't blame you, Evan," the thought voice continued, soft as a sigh. "You were busy. I wish you'd seen me, but you will. You'll understand now, having to live like this." I sank onto the edge of her bed, my head in my hands. She wasn't angry. She was just sad. And in that moment, I felt her loneliness, her silent struggle, as if it were my own, because for now, I was wearing her smile like armor, just as she had. The physical transformation was keeping pace with the psychological one. My appetite changed. I found myself craving the salads and frozen yogurt Clara loved. Turning away from the heavy foods I used to eat, my emotional responses were different. 2. A sad movie on TV made my eyes well up with tears, a reaction I would have scoffed at as Evan. I felt things more acutely, my emotions closer to the surface, less filtered through logic and reason. One afternoon, I was in her room, trying to find a textbook, when the witch appeared, not in person, but in the reflection of the vanity mirror. I was looking at my own face, and then for a split second, her dark, ageless eyes were staring back at me from within it. I recoiled, stumbling backward and falling onto the floor. My heart was pounding. Her voice echoed in the room, seeming to come from the mirror itself. The vessel is adapting, or is it the soul that's changing? "Leave me alone," I managed to say, my voice trembling. A faint, cruel smile played on her reflected lips. "You are beginning to understand love in a different way, aren't you? Evan, not the protective, distant love of a brother for a sister, but the love of being seen, the love of being wanted. It is a powerful thing, a dangerous thing." And then she was gone. My own frightened face stared back at me from the mirror once more. Her words burrowed deep into my mind. The love of being wanted. I thought of Ryan. I thought of the way his eyes lit up when he saw me. I thought of the warmth of his hand when he'd casually taken mine while walking through the school hallway yesterday. I had pulled away, flustered, but the memory of the contact lingered. The feeling had been unpleasant, frighteningly so. I was losing myself. The man I was, the logical, detached medical student, was being eroded day by day, replaced by this new person who felt everything so deeply, who moved with a grace he'd never known, who was beginning to find a strange comfort in this feminine prison. I spent an hour that evening simply brushing my Clara's hair, 100 strokes, just like I'd seen her do. The repetitive motion was calming. The long, silky strands slid through the bristles, shining under the lamplight. It was a simple, feminine ritual, and as I did it, looking at the girl in the mirror, a terrifying thought surfaced. I was starting to like this. Not the deception, not the fear, but the small moments, the feeling of a pretty dress against my skin, the way Mia would link her arm through mine, the simple, uncomplicated affection from Ryan. These were pieces of Clara's life, a life I now inhabited, and I was beginning to see why. Despite her hidden pain, she had fought so hard to live it. The mirror no longer showed me a monster or a stranger. It showed me a possibility, a different life, a different self. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Ryan was the epicenter of my confusion. He was the one person I couldn't fool with a simple smile or a memorized fact from Clara's journal. He knew her intimately, and he was starting to notice the changes, but he wasn't seeing an imposter. He was seeing an evolution. One afternoon, we were sitting on a bench in the park, a favorite spot of theirs according to the journal. The autumn leaves were a riot of red and gold around us. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me. "You're different, you know," he said softly, his brow furrowed. My blood ran cold. This was it. The game was up, Mo. "Different? What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "I don't know." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed against my skin, and an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. "You seem quieter, more thoughtful. When you look at me, it's like you're really seeing me. Before, sometimes it felt like you were looking through me." His words were a punch to the gut. He was seeing the parts of me that were still Evan, the quiet observer, the analytical thinker. He was falling for the hybrid I had become, a fusion of my soul and her body, and he was attributing it to her growing into a deeper, more mature person. "I guess I've just been doing a lot of thinking lately," I said, the excuse feeling flimsy. He smiled, a gentle, loving smile that made my heart do a painful little flip. "I like it. I mean, I've always loved you, Clara. But this feels new. It feels real." He leaned in, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to kiss me. My entire being recoiled at the thought. I turned my head slightly, and his lips brushed my cheek instead. The contact was brief, soft, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. It was a sensation that was entirely foreign, and yet my body responded with a blush that spread across my cheeks, a reaction I had no control over. "You're beautiful when you blush," he whispered. I couldn't speak. I was drowning in a sea of conflicting emotions. Part of me, the Evan part, was screaming in silent horror. This was wrong, a complete betrayal of who I was. But another part, a newer, softer part that felt more and more like me, was basking in the warmth of his affection, to be looked at with such adoration, to be called beautiful. It was a potent drug. The temptation, as the witch had called it, grew stronger every day. I tried to keep my distance from Ryan, making excuses to avoid being alone with him. But he was persistent, his affection unwavering. He seemed to think my reticence was a sign of my lingering grief, which only made him more gentle, more attentive. The breaking point came a few nights later. It was a Friday, day 5 of my 7-day sentence. Mia had dragged me to a party. The house was loud, crowded, and overwhelming. I felt trapped, the smiling faces pressing in on me. I made an excuse and slipped out to the backyard for some air. Ryan found me there, standing by a string of fairy lights. "Hey," he said, coming to stand beside me. "You okay?" "Yeah, just needed a minute," I replied, hugging myself against the evening chill. He took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him. The gesture was so simple, so kind. It almost broke me. "I know things have been hard," he said, his voice low and serious. "And I know I can't fix it, but I'm here. Clara, I'm not going anywhere." He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His hand was large and warm, completely enveloping my smaller one. We stood there in silence for a long time, the distant thud of the party's music a backdrop to the quiet intimacy of the moment. I didn't pull away this time. It felt right, comforting. "Clara," he said, turning to face me. He put his other hand on my cheek, his thumb gently stroking my skin. "I love you more than ever." His eyes were so sincere, so full of love for a girl who was no longer there. He was looking at me, but he was seeing her, and in that moment, I wanted to be her. I wanted to be the girl who deserved this love, who could accept it without this tearing conflict in my soul. He leaned in again, and this time, I didn't turn away. His lips met mine. The kiss was gentle, tentative. It was nothing like I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a man kissing a man. It wasn't even a man in a woman's body being kissed. It was just a kiss, and my body, this girl's body, responded instinctively. My lips softened under his, a soft sigh escaping them. My heart hammered in my chest, a wild, frantic rhythm that was part fear, part something else. Excitement. I pulled back abruptly, my eyes wide with panic. I have to go," I stammered, shrugging off his jacket and practically running from the party, leaving him standing there looking confused and hurt. I ran all the way back to Clara's house, my chest heaving, tears blurring my vision. I slammed the door to her room and slid down against it, burying my face in my hands. What was happening to me? The kiss hadn't been repulsive, it had been nice, and that scared me more than anything. That night, I had a dream. I was in a field of wildflowers, wearing a simple white sundress. The sun was warm on my skin, and a gentle breeze played with my long hair. I was laughing, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Ryan was there, holding my hand, and we were running through the flowers together. In the dream, there was no conflict, there was no Evan, there was only Clara, and she was happy, she was in love, she was free. I woke up with tears on my cheeks. The dream had felt more real than my waking life. It was a glimpse of a life I could have, a happiness I could feel. The emotional walls I had built around my old identity were crumbling. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The girl staring back looked sad, her eyes filled with a deep, aching confusion. I touched my lips, the phantom sensation of Ryan's kiss still lingering. A question, dangerous and seductive, echoed in the silent room. What's so wrong with being loved as a girl? The 7th and final day dawned with an eerie, unnatural stillness. The sky was a strange bruised purple, and the air was thick and heavy, charged with an unspoken energy. It was the day the moon would change color. It was the day my debt would come due. I moved through the day in a fog. School was a distant reality. The voices of my teachers and friends a muffled drone. My mind was a battleground. Evan, the logical med student, fought desperately for survival, reminding me of my past, my ambitions, my identity. But Clara, the identity I now wore like a second skin, whispered of a different future, one filled with art, with emotion, with the warmth of Ryan's love. After school, I didn't go home. I felt an inexplicable pull toward the ocean, the same beach where Clara and I had spent countless summer days as children. I walked along the shore, the cool water washing over my bare feet. I was wearing one of her favorite dresses, a simple flowy blue sundress that caught the wind and billowed around my legs. The fabric felt soft against my skin, as familiar now as my own name once was. I looked down at my hands, small, delicate, with their pale pink nails. I looked at my slender legs, the hem of the dress dancing around my knees. This body no longer felt like a costume. It felt like me. The thought was no longer terrifying. It was simply a fact. As dusk began to settle, the sky bled into shades of orange and violet. And then, rising over the horizon, came the moon. It was not the familiar silver orb of my past life. It was a chilling, luminous blood red, as if it had been stained with the ink of the contract I had signed. A cold wind swept across the beach, and with it came the witch. She materialized from the shadows of the dunes, as silent and sudden as ever. "The seventh day is ending," she said, her voice a low hum that vibrated in the air. "The moon has changed. The debt must be paid." I faced her, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. The panic I had expected to feel was absent, replaced by a strange, quiet resolve. What happens now? "Now you have a choice," she said, her dark eyes pinning me in place. "A choice I do not offer to many. You have fulfilled your part of the bargain. You have lived as her, felt her pain, and honored her memory. Her soul is calm." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I can undo it all. I can return you to your own body, to your own life. You will wake up in your bed tomorrow as Evan Mayhew, and this week will be nothing but a fading, surreal dream. The world will remember Clara as she was gone." My breath caught in my throat. Go back, the thought was a sudden dizzying rush, to be myself again, to feel the familiar weight and strength of my own body, to pursue my own dreams. It was everything I had wanted just a week ago. "And Clara," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "If you return, the balance is restored. A soul cannot be cheated from its fate. She will be gone. Truly and forever this time. Her soul will cross over, and she will be at peace, but she will be gone from this world." The alternative hung in the air, unspoken but overwhelmingly present. Or the witch continued, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "You can stay. You can remain as you are now. Clara Mayhew, the contract will be fulfilled, the debt paid. Her soul, freed from its earthly ties by your sacrifice, will be allowed to rest. But you, Evan, will be gone forever, a ghost in a life that is no longer yours, until even the memory of you fades." The choice, it was so simple yet so impossible, to kill my sister for a second time, or to kill myself. I turned away from the witch and looked out at the blood-red moon reflected on the dark water. I thought of my old life, med school, anatomy charts, the sterile smell of the lab. It all felt so distant, like a story I'd read about someone else. The ambitions that had once defined me now seemed hollow, colorless. Then, I thought of the past 7 days. I thought of the revelation in Clara's journal, the weight of her unspoken sadness. I thought of Mia's unwavering friendship. I thought of the feeling of charcoal on my fingertips in art class, the frustration and the tiny spark of a world I'd never known. I thought of Ryan. I thought of his gentle touch, the sincere love in his eyes, the kiss that had shaken me to my core. That life, Clara's life, was filled with a richness and an emotional depth I had never allowed myself to experience as Evan. I had been so focused on the clinical facts of life that I had forgotten how to simply live. Clara had been given 18 years. It wasn't enough. She had dreams she never got to realize, a love she never got to fully explore, a pain she never got to heal. If I went back, all of that would be extinguished forever. Her light would be gone. But if I stayed, I could live for her. I could go to art school. I could learn to paint. I could cherish her friends. I could accept the love that Ryan so freely offered. I could carry her light forward. It wouldn't be my life, but it would be a life. A beautiful, complicated, vibrant life. I looked down at my hands again and smiled, a real genuine smile. She lived such a short life, I said, my voice soft but clear, carrying on the wind, but it was a beautiful one. She deserved more. I turned back to the witch. My decision made, there was no more conflict, no more fear, only a profound sense of peace. Let me continue it for her. The witch of Vire Lane held my gaze for a long moment, and for the first time, I saw something other than cruel amusement in her eyes. It looked almost like respect. She nodded slowly. The debt is paid. She raised her hand, and the wind whipped around me, pulling at my dress and my hair. It wasn't a violent wind, but a warm, gentle one. It felt like an embrace. For a fleeting moment, I saw a shimmering, translucent figure of Clara standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder. She was smiling, her face free from all the sadness I'd read in her journal. A single silent word formed in my mind. In her voice, thank you. Then, she dissolved into a swirl of light, like 1,000 fireflies, that flew up toward the red moon and disappeared. The wind died down. The moon faded back to its familiar silver. I was alone on the beach. I took a deep breath of the salty air. The ache of Evan's loss was there, a dull, phantom pain. But the prevailing feeling was one of purpose. The bargain was complete. My new life had just begun. The smell of turpentine and oil paint was my new reality. It had replaced the scent of antiseptic and formaldehyde, and I had never felt more at home. I stood in a sun-drenched studio at the art college Clara had dreamed of attending, a brush in my hand and a half-finished canvas on my easel. It was a landscape of the beach where my old life had ended and this one had begun. It had taken time, but I had learned. I pored over Clara's old sketchbooks, mimicking her style until it became my own. I discovered a patience and an eye for color I never knew I possessed. My professors called me a promising, if unusually melancholic, new talent. Ryan was still by my side. Our relationship had deepened into something quiet, stable, and profoundly loving. He had been patient with me after my grief, and our connection had been rebuilt on a new, more honest foundation. He still didn't know the truth. Of course, he never would. He was in love with Clara Mayhew, and that's who I was now. Sometimes, he would look at me with that same thoughtful expression he'd had in the park a year ago. You know, he said one evening as we sat on the couch, my head resting on his shoulder. Sometimes I miss the old you, the loud, bubbly girl. But I wouldn't trade the you I have now for anything. You're deeper, like you've lived a whole other life. I just smiled and squeezed his hand. Maybe I have. My life was a strange and beautiful paradox. I grieved for the brother I had been, for the man who was gone, but I celebrated the woman I had become. I found joy in the simple things, the swish of a skirt against my legs, a shared joke with Mia, the feeling of Ryan's hand in mine. I was living a life of emotion and connection, a life more vivid than Evan's had ever been. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I paused in front of the mirror. It had been a long time since I'd felt any sense of disconnect with my reflection. The face staring back at me was simply mine. The hazel eyes, the long chestnut hair, the soft curve of my lips. This was me, Clara. Then, for a fleeting moment, her reflection flickered in the glass. The witch of Vire Lane stood behind me, her dark eyes watching me with an unreadable expression. I didn't jump or cry out. I simply met her gaze in the mirror. The debt bought is paid, she said, her voice a soft echo in the quiet room. But tell me, child, looking at the life you have built, the love you have found, the art you create, was it truly a debt you paid, or was it a gift you received? The question hung in the air between us. A year ago, I would have called it a curse, a punishment, a terrible, soul-crushing debt. But now I thought of the gray, methodical existence of Evan and the colorful, emotionally rich world of Clara. I had lost a life, but I had gained a soul. I reached out and touched my own reflection in the mirror, my fingertips meeting the cool glass. I smiled, a true and peaceful smile that reached my eyes, and for the first time, When I looked into the mirror, I saw no one else. Not Evan, not a stranger, not even the ghost of my sister. Just me. It was a gift, I whispered. And in the mirror, the witch smiled before fading into nothing, leaving me alone with my new and final truth.